price of water, kind of the economics of water. That's April 3rd. And then there's the Northern Water Symposium, which is April 8th, and they haven't opened up registration for that yet, but that one is free out of all of those. I think that's the only free one. And those tickets usually go quickly, so we'll send out an announcement when the registration opens. And your event write-up was going to be due, I think, a little before the Northern Water Symposium, so we're going to push it back so you can go to that if you want and have time to write it up. We'll push it back by like a couple weeks. Other things, so we have scheduled the graduation date for May 28th, and we'll also send that out. We'll send a save the date for that. I think it's a Thursday. It's the Thursday after.
I know it's
Wednesday. Wednesday after. No, I think I don't know.
No.
28th is a Wednesday.
It's a Wednesday. Okay. After Memorial. Is that the day after Memorial Day?
No, Tuesday would be the day after. So.
The week. Yeah.
Yes, it's the week
after Memorial Day. So make sure that's on your calendar. And then book reports are going to be coming up in April. So for those of you, I've heard a few folks talking about their books. So it sounds like you're in the process of reading those. So be prepared for April. So today we are going to be focusing on economic growth and development. Last session in January, we focused a lot on agricultural aspects and kind of some of the complexities and conflicts between ag and municipal use. It sounded like it was a really useful and kind of eye-opening session for folks based on your responses. People thought the Thornton presentation was interesting, but sounds like people would like to get a little more down the weeds on that, a little more discussion on that. And then really enjoyed Zach's presentation, just hearing straight from a farmer and some of the struggles and things. Anyone want to comment on some of their takeaways from that session? Looking up.
We were talking about that this morning, but next none of us want to be a farmer right
I know. Yeah, and that's a struggle for the agricultural community. It's just people are retiring and a lot of the younger generation are going into it, including myself. My dad's a farmer, and as you can see, I'm not in central Illinois farming. So yeah, it's a real challenge, and as the smaller scale farmers, retire and go out, they get bought up by larger corporations, and we just get that percentage of our population in the U.S. that is actually farmers just keeps going down and down and down. Because it's hard. Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I thought it was interesting his comment on the price of open space and how that really changes the economy for especially small farmers. So how to balance that, especially north in Colorado, where a lot of our counties and municipalities want to purchase and protect open space, but how do we do that in a way that doesn't damage our small farmers?
Yeah, I thought that was also very interesting and something I hadn't considered before. Yeah, and I mean, sounds like there's not really a lot of solutions out there at the time, so something to, have some minds come together and think about that issue. Other thoughts?
I think it was Jim stated that how important it is for agriculture areas to act as a reservoir or holding ground for water. That I hadn't really considered. Just make everything urban, it's all going to run off more quickly than you have the land that can hold on to it for crop use and things like that.
Very true. Yeah, when you look at the system as a whole, the importance of agriculture as an actual backup and reservoir is very important.
I was thinking about this just the other day, talking about it with a coworker, because
We put it on centers kind of on the far west side of Greeley, and development is definitely slowly encroaching out there. And we're seeing a lot of housing developments pop up right behind us. We just had a Starbucks and a QT go in, like a block away from us. And it's a really interesting kind of mix of things right now because some of that farmland is still there, but we're pretty certain that with time that'll disappear. And so we've been looking at it kind of through the lens of like, how is this going to affect our ecosystem and habitat that we're trying to restore and make space for wildlife and use it for environmental ed. So it gets complicated when you start thinking about like, okay, it's not only affecting this parcel of land that is being sold, but also so much beyond that. And it'll be interesting to see how that changes.
Yeah, I know some folks wrote about like with the Thornton purchase, and you know, I mean, a lot of people in this area are not obviously in favor of buy and dry, and especially when other, you know, metro area water providers are coming in and purchasing water rights. How do we prevent that? How do we prevent that without limiting a farmer's right to sell their land and water to the highest bidder? Because when we start putting restrictions on like, no, you cannot do that, or you can, you know, we can't sell outside of the land, I'm sure water prices are going to go down. And then, you know, so it's a very tricky, if anyone's got a solution to that, I'd love to hear it. That's one of the biggest, that is something I see as one of the biggest challenges right now for Colorado is how do we plan as a state and a region without, and have regional collaboration and share water effectively without infringing on people's rights and their self-determination. So that's always a challenge for government, right? Any other thoughts on ag? Yeah.
Just one thing that's been kind of stuck in my head on repeat is what Robert said was we're building houses and infrastructure and, you know, buildings on some of the best farmland in the country. Mm-hmm. And it's just kind of being see up range.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's been stuck on my head when I'm driving up and down I-25.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing all the
yeah.
so.
Yep. Yeah, I just went I was like going out to eat somewhere off of Harmony, and like it was it's like kind of by it's the Lady Moon, I think is the street, but like you drive down a road and there's like development, and then there's just like these small little like ag fields like still in the middle of it, and you're like yeah, it is, yeah. But like, how do you decide, you know, we can't grow in these really productive areas, or we're going to prioritize these really productive areas and try and protect them, but then the farmers might want to sell, so yeah. Any other thoughts? Okay. All about economic growth and development today. So this is usually a really interesting session, and we get into, you know, some of the housing affordability issues with the price of water, and some of the interconnections and complexities of this issue. We'll hear from Adam Jokers, who I think many of you know, if not all of you know. We'll hear from Harvard Homes and Habitat for Humanity, and then our kind of longer lunch speaker will talk about efforts to better integrate water and land use planning and some of the best practices around that. And this is that talk is really helpful just to give folks a lot of tools that they can use when they're thinking about like, how do we do this? What are some different like points of kind of inserting those best practices into our land use planning? So it's a great presentation. I'm looking forward to that. Any questions before I get started on some stakeholder engagement material? Okay, so this is one of the presentations that I'm going to give. It's kind of like we talked about initially the empathic learning or empathic listening and kind of listening to understand the importance of building trust. We did little exercises about that. Now we're going to take that one step further and talk about some best practices for stakeholder engagement. And this is something we hear a lot about. It's like, yes, especially as like a government employee and you're representing constituents of people, we need to be doing good stakeholder engagement. We need to be gathering input, et cetera. But this stakeholder engagement means a lot of things to a lot of different people. It can mean simply, holding some sessions where people are able to voice their opinions, or it can mean an active relationship over time where you're kind of co-developing, research or products together. So I'm going to talk through some case studies in Northern Colorado, and then we'll talk through kind of what it looks like to do effective stakeholder engagement. Is this not on? Okay. So why is this so important for water specifically? Water is very complicated, as we know, through this class and just through your day-to-day life. And it has a lot of values and uses. And this is kind of what we were just talking about. So how do we fulfill all of those different values and uses and sustain them into the future? How do we balance all of these different needs, complex administration, plus changing climate and hydrology? Who has a voice and who's making decisions on our water use and management? Who doesn't? And how are we giving the opportunity to people to participate in that? And should they participate in it? Should the general public be participating in these decisions? What are the challenges and opportunities for stakeholder engagement? And how do we encourage more inclusive and collaborative discussions around water in Colorado? So we're going to kind of look at these different aspects, but these are things that come to mind when we're talking about specifically water and engagement. So we are going to look at the Cache Laputa watershed as a little case study. Near and dear to our hearts and our homes. This is average water supply of 274,000 acre feet a year. Covers, this area upstream of Fort Collins, actually the watershed dips into Wyoming, flows into the South Platte. This is not going to work. Maybe the batteries are dead, I'm not sure. So there's all of these different uses of the Pooter. And there's probably even more that I'm listing here, but we've got water supply for more than 400 residents. We are irrigating, this probably is less now, 150,000 acres of agricultural land. We're using it for industrial uses, just calling out breweries, oil and gas. And then recreation is a huge part of this watershed as well. 75 miles designated as part of the National Wild and Scenic River System. There's fishing, rafting, kayaking, hiking, camping, cycling. Then there's also this kind of urban greenway aspect to it. There's a lot of ecological values of the Pooter, threatened and endangered species, and wildlife and plants. So there's a lot of different groups working in this space to bring together different stakeholders on this issue to do different things. And then I've listed out some different mission statements of these different groups to just take a look at the values that are being represented in this conversation. So to improve and maintain the ecological health of the Poudre River watershed through community collaboration, that's Coalition for the Poudre River Watershed, focused a lot on kind of the watershed health aspect, but also community collaboration. Save the Poudre, protect and restore, that's pretty, that is their bottom line. Poudre runs through it. How many are familiar with that group? A few folks. This was a group that came together in like 2017-ish, maybe. Actually, kind of as a part of Water Literate Leaders spinoff, or I can't remember if it came before or after Water Literate Leaders started, but it basically brought together a bunch of different interests on the Poudre to talk and learn from each other and to have more collaborative dialogue. This group now puts on the Poudre River Forum, and it's like a space to just hear what's going on the Poudre. So their mission is to make the Poudre River the world's best example of a working river that is also healthy. So we've got kind of like, when I think of working river, I think of economy and kind of those economic and community values. And then the Cache la Poudre National River National Heritage Area to promote a variety of historic and cultural opportunities, engage people in the river corridor, and inspire learning, preservation, and stewardship. So there's a lot of different groups, a lot of different values there. How are each of these groups engaging with the community? What is their role to engage with the community? And I guess I brought these up because they're external to kind of our municipal groups that are also working in this space, and they have mission statements that reflect their values. So then I want to bring up NISP. This has been a controversial project that involves the Poudre River, and just bring up some of the values around it. So this is a word cloud that I generated from Northern Water's website. So really positive words here: stewardship, economy, jobs, growing, reliable, security, efficient, safety, sustainable. Good things. This is a word cloud that I generated from the Save the Poudre website about NISP. And you can see very different kind of framing of the same issue. So we've got, engineering, deplete, diverge, stress, damage, emissions, floods, costs. And, when you look at any sort of issue, like if you look at this, there are positives and negatives to this project. How we represent kind of those different interests and different aspects of the situation and how we take those into account when we make decisions makes a big difference in how those projects succeed or do not succeed. Not to say that like NISP would be, through the approval process on its way to being constructed right now if they had done a better job of stakeholder engagement. I think Save the Poudre is, they were going to sue no matter what happened. But really having effective and meaningful stakeholder engagement can go a very long way to having a successful project. Not to mention like having buy-in from everyone and having whatever comes out of that project be a success on multiple accounts, not just like your own account. So let's talk about a few best practices. So first of all, this is a big one. Who are your stakeholders? This is anyone with an interest in the issue. This is a very broad kind of picture of the issue, and it can involve thousands of different people grouped by sectors. So a good way to think about this is the 4 I's: who's interested, who's influential, who's invested, and who is impacted by the problem. This is also something that we promote, is to ensure that historically excluded and underserved communities have a seat at the table, to provide the most just outcomes. So this is from the EPA, and they have a whole like stakeholder engagement framework that they promote for watershed, kind of watershed scale projects. Who should be involved? So this, again, we're getting at groups from different perspectives, interests, groups who might work against the project if they are excluded. That's a big one. People from marginalized backgrounds that are historically excluded from decision-making processes, individuals with skills and expertise specific to the project, individuals or organizations who can make decisions that affect the project or who might be affected by project decisions. So I think, you know, there's some people that will just never collaborate. But you need to engage them, make sure they're informed, make sure you are at least kind of recognizing their participation, and as much as possible, taking them along in the process. So this is a example of stakeholder mapping, and we're going to do this exercise. So on the y-axis, you have influence, so influence increases. On the x-axis, you have interest, increasing that way. So kind of down in this quadrant, you've got partners that just need to be informed. These are people that you're kind of keeping up to speed on what's going on. As you gain an influence, but not a lot of interest, these are partners that you need to build that interest in because they have a lot of influence. As you go over to on the other side of high interest, but low influence, you engage with, consult closely. High interest, high influence, you're partnering with and engaging and consulting with closely. Those are your key stakeholder constituents. And we'll talk a little bit more, we'll do that exercise in a little bit. So once you've identified your stakeholders, how you connect with those stakeholders is very important. And this kind of goes back to the empathic listening. But you need to develop engagement and outreach strategies that are specific to different stakeholder types. Consider the type of communication, language, messaging, framing, and incentives for participation. You know, how you frame an issue really matters. And there's, again, it all comes back to those values. So we can be talking about the Poudre River, and I can be speaking to, you know, a recreationalist or someone from the recreation community and call out those values, recognizing that those are important. And we all want to protect the river, let's say that. That's the bottom line. But how I reach out to that community and get them engaged is very important. And so we need to think about their point of view, and that's why understanding those perspectives is so important. Connect with community leaders and points of contact. So a lot of times, you know, you can't talk to every single person in a community. Who are the community people, community leaders? Who are the folks already representing, you know, certain populations or groups? Those are folks you want to connect with. And then again, just driving this home, listen to understand perspectives and experiences. Conflict is going to happen. I think that's an important part of setting up your engagement. Conflict is okay. It's expected. Everyone is not going to agree on everything, but you need to create an environment where everyone's opinion is going to be heard and it's valued, and people feel safe to express those opinions. This is a big one too. So when you come into an issue, you're bringing your own interests and biases. And before you even start engaging with other stakeholders, you need to say, okay, this is my perspective. This is what I'm bringing to this. This is how other people might see me engaging in this issue. and recognize that. And you can even, throw out some disclaimers of like, look, I know I'm representing this organization, but like, let's put that aside and we're going to try and like achieve this goal, for example. And then critical, you need to just really take the time to identify needs, concerns, interests. And there's a bunch of different kind of tools and processes to do that, which if you're interested in some of those, I can send you them afterwards. Oh, gosh. Yeah. So we're gonna keep going along here. So additionally, there's a lot of power dynamics that play into these issues, very political, as we were talking about. And it's hard for a lot of people or groups to participate kind of on the same playing field. And so if you can at least identify where those power dynamics are, past relationships and historical things are also really important in how the power dynamics play out. And I think I have that. Oh, no, I don't have that. But think about if there are ways you can try and level that playing field. Maybe it's, hey, we're not all going to meet in this huge group meeting where only 2 people are talking and sharing their opinions. I need to meet individually with these other people because otherwise I'm just not going to hear from them because they don't have enough power to voice their opinions in this group meeting. Different methods like that, hire a good facilitator or several. And I think we all know, the importance of this, but facilitators are unbiased. They can lead a group process, dialogue, negotiation, decision-making. Not all facilitators are created equal, however, and there's some good ones and there's some bad ones. So like, if you have a bad experience with the facilitator, don't just throw it all out. Try and, ask around, see where other people have had good experiences. Because when you get a good facilitator who knows the issues and they know a lot of the background and the groups involved, it's very powerful and can really help you go on to that negotiation and resolution. Building relationships, I think, I'm not sure, but I think a lot of people in this room do a great job of that already. I think building the trust and having just a sincere desire to engage with people is critical. Oh, here's the taking into account past wrongs or relationship history. So like maybe your organization had some beef with someone 10 years ago or a different organization, or maybe there was some issue and like now the trust is just eroded. But you're new to the position and you don't know that history. So like you need to find that out and make sure you know that, so that when you're going into these issues and you're going into these conversations, you're like, why isn't this person talking to me? Like what is that book? Like I didn't do anything, but there's a surprising amount of that goes on in water that is important to account for. Trying to create a transparent and iterative or adaptable process. So like a lot of times we come into an issue and it's like, okay, we're gonna like figure this all out and then we're gonna be done. And now we don't have to engage with anyone ever again. Water problems, they oftentimes are not things that are going to be resolved. And so these are things that require constant management, constant stakeholder engagement with the same people. And so these are relationships you need to maintain over time, and having kind of this, okay, let's do this and let's learn from this aspect and then let's change it. Having that flexibility to adapt and change is very important. And then if you can build in equitable engagement so that you're able to reach different populations of people, that is also a plus. Very important to have informal spaces for conversation and networking. I always hear like, a lot of the most important conversations happen in the hallway. So making sure it's amazing how important this is. So you design a meeting, you have, it's packed meeting, there's 5 minutes for a bathroom break, you're having working lunch, and like no one has time to actually like talk to each other as a person. And then you get done with the meeting and you're like, wow, that was like such a whirlwind, I don't even know what happened. You need to build in time for just connecting with people. And it's hard to do that in our busy schedules, but like we need breaks and we need those spaces in the hallway. We need lunch to have conversations and build trust and network. And then ideally, this is like the ideal, which is very hard to do, takes a lot of time. You're co-developing goals and outcomes with your stakeholders so that you have a shared understanding of timelines, expectations, roles, responsibilities. A lot of times in these issues, there's trade-offs, there's uncertainties. You're recognizing those, you're discussing them, you're recognizing, hey, we don't know exactly what the future is going to bring in terms of water variability, but we're going to do these different scenarios to account for that. Oftentimes, no one wins. And the goal in complex issues is not to reach consensus and say, yes, everyone is kumbaya, like happy, we're all happy with this outcome. But you're reaching a point where people aren't gonna go against it. And people aren't going to try and shoot it down. So you're reaching a point where everyone's like, okay, I didn't get everything I wanted, but I can live with this. And it did address this one thing of mine, which I'm really happy about. So we're gonna go forward with this. And you know, it's not a kumbaya moment. It's more like, okay, we're making this work. And that sometimes doesn't feel wonderful, but it's an effective way to move forward. And I'll just mention too, I didn't mention up here, but when you have a good facilitator, they also design really effective meetings. And so I don't know how many times we like get into these meetings and everyone wants to have meetings and they're not designed well. And you just sit there and it's a waste of everyone's time. Nothing happens in the meeting. There's like no point to having the meeting. So it's like you have outcomes developed, you have activities that are developed that are, you know, designed to reach those outcomes, and it's a really structured process so that they're not wasting people's time. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. So bottom line, successful stakeholder engagement and effective collaboration, they take a lot of time and they're usually really challenging. And so a lot of times what we do is we don't do it because it just takes too long and it's too hard. And to take everyone along and reach that kind of, I can live with this point, it is very challenging. So, but as much as we can design processes and be transparent with this goal in mind, we should strive to do so. Because a lot of times, even though it takes you a long time to do the stakeholder engagement, your outcome is such that people are bought into it, and now you're not going to have to go through like 7 lawsuits, which are going to delay your eventual outcome, right? So it can end up being quicker. Collaboration builds more collaboration, so it's not just a one-off, like I was saying before. You're not just, okay, we engaged you on this, and now I'll see you never. You're creating long-lasting relationships and skills that you are actually learning together as a group, that you're going to then use time and time again over your career as you continue to engage with these people. And I think Water Literate Leaders is great because you meet a lot of those people, and you're kind of on the journey together, where you're like, hey, I know this person over in Windsor, and I can call them because there's a trust there, and I can talk with them about this situation and get some advice. As I mentioned before, we're not really solving problems anymore. We're just managing. It's a long-term management. These are complex issues. There's no bullet solutions. And so I think setting that up as an expectation as well, where it's like, we're in this together to continually negotiate and find management strategies that are going to meet multiple beneficial uses. That's what we're aiming for. So I will stop there and take questions. Yeah.
This is less a question, but I'm glad you presented this because we're doing a kind of new stakeholder engagement process around the stadium process or the stadium decision making for the city of Fort Collins, and I'm very excited about it, and it really follows all of these tenets. So I don't know if you guys have read about it, but the Hughes Stadium property has been hotly contested about what we should do with it, and there are a variety of stakeholder groups who have essentially conflicting ideas, and so we're actually doing like a representative sampling across the city, and we are paying for childcare and food for these folks to come together. We're having a professional facilitator. We're inviting specific stakeholder groups to do presentations. We're going to have our traditional outreach opportunities as well for folks who are not just in civic assembly. I'm just super excited. This is the first time we've ever done this. I don't think it's a very frequently used process because it's quite meaty and involved, but I think it's very well suited to this kind of decision making where it's a community resource. We're wanting that buy-in. I think it's going to be more palatable for folks who don't get what they want to see like, oh wait, this representative sample of residents is wanting this. So clearly it would not be a good strategy for like building a dam or, like something like that, but it could be really good for, like plans around water conservation or other kinds of smaller scale community projects. So as you were saying that, I was like, oh, we're doing a good thing, potentially. There are people who are not stoked that we're pursuing a non-traditional, what they consider a non-traditional process. I think mostly people who are used to their voices being the loudest. Right. So it's been interesting to see that people who don't want this process. I don't know if we usually are driving the bus and not hearing all the other voices. So
that's a really interesting point you brought up. I think I have certainly heard like, there's like this desire, or at least it's touted as like, we want to do good stakeholder engagement, not a forecast, like I'm talking like the water community and like kind of the powers that be in the water community in Colorado. It's like, we want to do, like, we need to do better outreach and like, la, la, la. But it's like, when you do that, you're bringing in voices that haven't been heard before. And like, yeah, a lot of those voices who have been loud for a long time are not going to have as much power. And so what I have seen is like, there's a lot of talk about doing that, but then there's no actual action. And the powers that be continue to be the powers that be.
Well, and what we have found is you do have to take additional steps, and it'll be interesting when we do the sampling because the loudest voices have the resources to be there. And so, even if they, I think, reached out to some of the historically underrepresented voices in the water conversations, the reality is those folks often have barriers to participation. And so I'm excited about this process because we are trying to offset as many of those barriers as possible, and we're even stratifying the people who are not typically engaged with local government, like really trying to, because we know we're going to hear from the people we always hear from. They're going to show up. Yeah. They're going to use all means necessary, but I think even if you invite them in, that's ticking a box, but chances are they're going to have a lower response rate. So it's hard. For sure.
I have a question for Melanie and the group at large. Is this something that City Council has initiated, is bought into, and is willing to adopt whatever recommendations come from?
Not necessarily. I think we have very different perspectives on council. We didn't have unanimous support for doing the civic assembly among council. It was a majority, I think 5 and 7. And we are putting money towards it. I think most of us are committed to to respecting the recommendations, maybe weighting them more heavily. In the end, we have the latitude, I guess, to tweak it. I'm pretty committed to going that direction, at least, you know, in majority, we have some people who are here and just like, no, I don't care what they said. But I think the majority, this is a big experiment. We don't know how it's gonna turn out. They may come up with a totally wacky proposal, but I don't think they will. I think they'll come up with something that's probably a good mix of all the priorities, which is really what we should end up with. So I hope that I will be like, good job, Susan.
I bet that is the outcome. And the only thing I would never encourage elected officials to put forward is like naming things to the community. Well, the reason I asked is that I have never heard of a council at large initiating a community input project on, you know, a future decision that a city council is going to need to make. So usually as the administrator, we know that we have to ultimately bring recommendations for council and trying to influence the votes. And so we dedicate years to effective public participation, and I watch it crumble the day that it's, you know, brought to the dais. So
I think that council's exceptional, and it's gonna just be like fire. No, but I think you're right, and they previously did like a traditional study. And like I said, we're gonna use surveys and focus groups and this and that, but,
did the study produce a recommendation that you then said, we don't like the recommendations, we're gonna do this?
the study was more just interest.
Okay.
So they did a more traditional, just reaching out to people, they did a survey. I think it's likely that our civic assembly will come up with kind of similar, similar trends, but I think that will bolster the argument. Let's see.
Well, that is a really good question. And, you know, when we think about these stakeholder processes, it's like, is the decision actually going to be based on that process? Or are you just giving lip service?
Yeah.
Which a lot of people do. And then it's just a waste of everyone's time and money. So
And
like,
people feel betrayed.
yeah, and you actually are eroding trust more. And so that's a very key point. And like, how can we build that into these processes?
I don't want to offend any of my elected officials in here, but I also think that that's an extreme responsibility of myself as a department head and city management. Is to have those closed door discussions with elected officials, help them understand the process, give them leverage, give them ammunition to support, you know, in the face of the heat that's coming at city council meetings. And that's partially how I frame what my job is. My job is, to the best of my ability, is to influence good policy choices.
Well, because I think elected officials oftentimes are thinking about reelection, and so, you know, the people who are yelling at you in the room are oftentimes the ones who most influence your election, and
Yeah. The intersection of good planning and policy.
I was just gonna kind of piggyback on what you were saying here around individual engagement with councils and planning commissions and things. And I think just defining who the decision maker is in that decision-making process very early, being very upfront about that, because a lot of times the decisions are working within sort of regulatory or legal constraints. And so maybe what you want to be the outcome through this process versus what the decision-making body has the authority, there's often a disconnect, and then involve all sorts of stakeholders, and they think that their input is going to shape something where the decision making is pretty limited in many cases. So recommend adding that to the list of best practices, as well as a clear strategy for documenting the process and the input received. Because I think if you're not there, but you want to use that feedback, you have to have trust in the process and how it was documented. And so both quantitatively and qualitatively potential.
And nothing, I was going to leave this room. But to your point about like educating about the authority levels. Thank you.
Yeah, so just remember that, we do record. Thank you.
So
We could stop. Do you want me to?
Wait, are we recording?
Yeah.
It's on. It's on.
He's not a public.
Oh, I see. Where is it? Where did it go?
I have a meeting this afternoon.
Okay.
It's okay, I can.
Okay. Okay, we're good.
We're all excited.
Um,
It is. No, I mean,